The white Ford Taurus sat alone in the county impound lot, its windows fogged from 3 days of rain, and Martin Webb pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the passenger door and saw, through the haze, something he had forgotten existed: a coat. His winter coat, draped across the back seat like a sleeping animal. The one he had worn to the bank that morning in 1991, the one with the lining torn at the left sleeve where he kept his receipts, the one Vivian had said to throw out a dozen times. The one he never threw out because it still fit, because the wool was good, because he had worn it to his father's funeral and to his daughter's wedding and to the hospital when the first grandchild was born. The county clerk had told him the car would be auctioned in 72 hours. Everything inside would be sold or discarded. Martin had $40 in his checking account, a change of clothes in a plastic bag from the Salvation Army, and exactly one place left to sleep tonight: the passenger seat of that car, if he could convince the lot attendant to let him stay. He could not convince the lot attendant. He stood in the rain and watched the Taurus through the chain-link fence, and he wondered if the receipt was still there, if it had survived 19 years in that coat pocket, if it meant anything at all anymore. Martin Webb had been a plumber for 53 years. He started at 17, carrying tools for a man named Harold Finch who smelled like tobacco and taught him that pipe thread went clockwise and that a man's word was the only thing he owned that couldn't be taken. Martin learned to sweat copper joints before he learned to drive a car. He learned to read blueprints before he read a newspaper. He learned that when water finds a weakness, it exploits it, and the only way to stop a leak was to go straight to the source. He met Vivian Chen in 1964 at a church picnic in Evanston. She was 23, teaching kindergarten at Lincoln Elementary, and she was standing by the potato salad with a smile that made Martin forget his own name. He asked her if she wanted to see his truck. She said she'd rather see his hands. He showed her his palms, calloused and stained with solder flux, and she took them in her small, clean fingers and said, "These are good hands. These are honest hands." They were married 6 months later, 47 years, 3 children. A house on Cherry Street with a porch that sagged and a basement that flooded every spring and a mortgage that took 30 years to pay off. Martin fixed everything in that house with his own hands. Vivian grew tomatoes in the backyard and read to the neighborhood children on summer afternoons and never once complained about the price of anything. When Martin retired at 65, the other plumbers gave him a brass pipe wrench mounted on a plaque. Vivian hung it in the garage next to his workbench. He still went out there some mornings, just to look at his tools, just to run his fingers over the wrenches and the cutters and the roll of thread sealing tape he had kept since his first day on the job with Harold Finch. That tape was yellowed now, the plastic cracked with age, the threaded spool nearly empty. But Martin kept it in the top drawer of his toolbox, wrapped in a rag, because it was the first thing he had ever bought with his own money, 79 cents at a hardware store on Clark Street. He had used it to seal a pipe in a school bathroom, and when the job passed inspection, Harold had nodded and said, "You'll do." The tape had sat in that drawer for 53 years. It had moved with him from the apartment to the first house to the house on Cherry Street. It had survived every flood and every fire and every child who ever borrowed his tools and forgot to return them. It was the only thing he took when they locked the door. The Tuesday in November arrived like any other Tuesday. Martin had woken at 6, made coffee, read the newspaper at the kitchen table while Vivian sliced apples for her oatmeal. The radiators clicked and hissed. The cat, a gray tabby named Pudge, sat on the windowsill and watched the leaves fall. Everything was ordinary. Everything was fine. The knock came at 7:15. Martin opened the door to find his daughter Margaret standing on the porch, flanked by 2 men in suits. Margaret was 43, a real estate agent, wearing a black coat that cost more than Martin's monthly pension. She had her mother's cheekbones and her father's stubbornness, and she was looking at him the way she looked at a house she was about to flip. "Dad, we need to talk." The men in suits were lawyers. They carried leather briefcases and spoke in the flat, practiced tones of people who had delivered this news before. Martin stood in the doorway with the cold air rushing past him into the house, and he listened as they explained that the home equity loan from 1991, the one he had taken out to pay for Margaret's college tuition, the one he had paid off in full with a cashier's check on December 3, 1991, had never actually been satisfied. Bank records show the payment was never applied to the principal, the taller lawyer said. Due to a clerical error, the debt has accrued interest for 19 years. The current balance is $243,000. Vivian had come to the door. She stood behind Martin with her hand on his back, and he could feel her trembling. "That's not possible," Martin said. "I paid it. I have the receipt." The shorter lawyer shook his head. If you have documentation, we'd be happy to review it, but the bank's records are clear. The debt was never satisfied. The lie-in on the property has been in effect since 1991. Our clients, your children, have elected to assume the debt and take possession of the property in lieu of foreclosure. Our clients, Margaret said, "Daddy, we didn't want to do this. But the house is worth more than the debt, and we can't just let the bank take it. This way, at least the money stays in the family." Martin looked at his daughter's face. He had changed her diapers. He had taught her to ride a bike. He had walked her down the aisle. And now she was standing on his porch in a $2,000 coat, telling him that she was taking his house. "Where are we supposed to go?" Vivian asked. Her voice was small, like a child's. "There's a shelter on Halstead," Margaret said. "I called them this morning. They have a bed for tonight." The taller lawyer handed Martin a folded piece of paper. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in legal action." Martin took the paper. He unfolded it. He read the words. And then he looked at his daughter, who was staring at her phone, typing a message, already moving on to the next transaction. "Margaret," he said. She looked up. "You were 7 years old when I took out that loan. You wanted to go to a summer camp, and I didn't have the money. So I borrowed it against the house so you could go. Do you remember that?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago, Dad. 19 years, Martin said. "And now you're taking the house." "I'm not taking it. I'm saving it. If I don't take it, the bank will, and you'll get nothing. At least this way we can sell it and split the equity. You'll get something." "We'll get nothing," Vivian said. "We'll get a shelter on Halstead." Margaret turned and walked down the porch steps. The lawyers followed. They got into a black SUV with tinted windows, and they drove away, and Martin stood in the doorway of his house, the house he had bought with his own hands, the house he had raised 3 children in, the house he had paid for twice, and he watched them go. Vivian was crying. Martin put his arm around her and led her inside and closed the door, and they sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they had shared 10,000 meals, and they did not speak for a long time. They packed everything they could fit into 2 bags. Martin took his tools. Vivian took her grandmother's silver candlesticks, the ones that had come from Poland in 1924, wrapped in her winter coat. She took the clay handprint from her first kindergarten class, a small brown imprint of a 5-year-old's palm, pressed into clay and fired in a kiln, the edges rough, the center smooth, the name Jamie scratched into the back with a toothpick. She had kept it for 40 years. It had sat on the windowsill in the kitchen, next to the cactus that never died. It was the first thing she had ever made as a teacher, and she had promised herself that she would keep it forever. Martin took the roll of thread sealing tape. He took his pipe wrench and his adjustable pliers and his soldering torch. He took the photograph of his parents from the living room mantel and the quilt his grandmother had made and the Bible his father had carried through the war. Everything else stayed. The furniture, the dishes, the books. The cat, which Vivian had to leave with the neighbor because the shelter didn't allow pets. Pudge sat on the windowsill and watched them leave. The shelter on Halstead was a converted warehouse with rows of cots and the smell of bleach and despair. A woman with tired eyes gave them a number and pointed to 2 cots near the bathroom. Martin helped Vivian make the bed with sheets that felt like sandpaper, and they sat on the edge of the cot and looked at the other people in the shelter, the ones who had lost everything, the ones who had nothing left to lose. "I can't do this," Vivian whispered. "I can't sleep here. We don't have anywhere else to go." "What about the car?" "It's in the impound lot. They took it this morning." Vivian closed her eyes. She was 72 years old. She had never slept anywhere but in her own bed with her own pillow, with the sound of the radiator hissing and Martin breathing beside her. "We'll find a way," Martin said. "I always find a way." He held her hand, and they sat in the dim light of the shelter, and the hours passed like days. The next morning, Martin went to the county courthouse. He had spent the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the receipt. He remembered it clearly. He remembered the cashier's check, the bank officer's signature, the way the woman at the counter had smiled and said, "All paid off, Mr. Webb. You're free and clear." He remembered putting the receipt in his coat pocket. He remembered wearing that coat to the funeral, to the wedding, to the hospital. And he remembered that the coat was still in the car. The county impound lot was a fenced-in rectangle of gravel and asphalt, surrounded by chain link topped with razor wire. A guard shack sat at the entrance, manned by a man in a brown uniform who was eating a donut and reading a magazine. Martin walked up to the window. "I need to get something from my car." The guard looked at him. "You got paperwork?" "I don't have anything." "They took everything. Can't let you in without paperwork. It's a white Taurus, 1998, license plate Illinois, X-ray 479. The guard shook his head. That car's going to auction on Friday. Everything inside becomes property of the county. There's a coat in the back seat. A winter coat. It has a receipt in the pocket, sir. I can't. Please. Martin's voice cracked. That receipt is the only thing that can save my wife and me from living on the street. Please. The guard looked at him. He looked at the donut in his hand. He looked at the magazine on his desk. I could lose my job. I could lose my wife. The guard was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed and he reached under his desk and he pulled out a key ring. 5 minutes. And you never saw me. The Taurus was parked in the back corner of the lot, covered in dust and bird droppings. The doors were locked. The guard unlocked the passenger door and stood back, his arms crossed, his eyes on the gate. Martin opened the door and leaned into the back seat. The coat was there, folded neatly as if someone had placed it carefully. He picked it up. It smelled like wool and rain and the faint sweetness of Vivian's perfume. He ran his hand along the left sleeve, feeling for the tear in the lining, and when his fingers found it, he slipped them inside. The receipt was still there. He pulled it out. It was folded into a small square, yellowed with age, the edges soft from years of being carried and forgotten. He unfolded it. The paper was thin, almost transparent, and the ink had faded to a pale blue, but the words were still readable. December 3, 1991, received from Martin Webb, payment in full. Home equity loan 4478892, amount $43,700, signature. Eleanor Vance, senior loan officer. Martin stared and stared at the signature. Eleanor Vance, senior loan officer. She had smiled at him when she stamped the payment. She had shaken his hand and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Webb. You own your home free and clear." He folded the receipt carefully, the way you fold something precious, and he put it in his front pocket against his heart. "Thank you," he said to the guard. "Just get out of here." Martin walked away from the impound lot with the receipt in his pocket and the coat over his arm. The sun was rising, orange and cold, and the streets were empty. He had no car, no house, no money. He had a wife in a shelter and a receipt from 19 years ago. But he had the receipt. He showed it to Vivian in the shelter that morning, holding it like a holy relic, and she touched the paper with her fingertips, the way she touched the clay handprint, as if she were afraid it would crumble. "This proves it," she said. "This proves we paid. Don't know if it still counts." It's been 19 years. "Martin, this is a legal document. It has a bank officer's signature. It has a date and an amount. This is proof." He looked at the receipt again. The signature. Eleanor Vance. He wondered if she was still alive, still working, still somewhere in this county. "We need a lawyer," he said. "We don't have money for a lawyer. We need someone to look at this. Someone who knows the law." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What about your brother?" Martin's brother, George, had been a lawyer. A good one once. But George had retired years ago, moved to Florida, stopped returning Martin's calls after the argument about their mother's will. "I haven't talked to George in 10 years. You haven't talked to George in 10 years because you're both too stubborn to apologize. But he's still your brother. And he's still a lawyer." Martin looked at the receipt. He looked at Vivian. He thought about the house on Cherry Street, the cat on the windowsill, the tomatoes in the backyard. "I'll call him." George answered on the third ring. "Martin?" "Yeah, it's me." There was a long pause. Martin could hear the ocean in the background, the sound of waves crashing on a beach somewhere far away. "I heard what happened," George said. "I'm sorry." "Who told you?" "Margaret called me. She said you were being difficult." "Difficult?" Martin laughed, a short, bitter sound. "She took our house, George. She and the other too. They said we owed money on a loan we paid off 19 years ago. I found the receipt. I have it right here." Another pause. The waves. "Let me see it." "I can't show it to you. You're in Florida. Mail it to me." "I don't have money for postage." George was quiet. Then he said, "I'll be there tomorrow. Don't do anything stupid before I get there." George arrived at the shelter the next afternoon, wearing a linen suit that was too light for November in Chicago, carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than both of them. Martin met him on the sidewalk. They stood facing each other, two old men with gray hair and tired eyes, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You look terrible," George said. "You look like a tourist." George laughed. It was the same laugh Martin remembered from childhood, loud and unguarded, the laugh of a man who had never learned to hold back. "Let me see this receipt." Martin pulled it from his pocket and handed it over. George took it carefully, holding it by the edges, and he studied it for a long minute. "This is good," he said. "This is very good. It's 19 years old. It's a receipt for payment in full, signed by a bank officer, stamped by the bank. This is a legal document." George looked up. Do you know where Eleanor Vance is now? No, I do. George smiled. She's the vice president of First National Bank. She's been there for 40 years. She's in the county business directory. Martin felt something shift in his chest. She's alive and well, and she works in the same building where you paid off your loan 19 years ago. The bank was a granite tower on Michigan Avenue, 30 stories of glass and steel, the kind of building that made Martin feel small and old. He and George stood in the lobby, looking at the directory on the wall. Eleanor Vance, George said. 15th floor. Office of the vice president. They took the elevator. The doors opened onto a wide hallway with polished floors and the smell of fresh coffee. A receptionist sat at a desk, young and polished, her hair pulled back in a perfect bun. May I help you? We're here to see Eleanor Vance, George said. Do you have an appointment? No. The receptionist gave them a practiced smile. Ms. Vance is very busy. If you'd like to schedule, it's about a loan payment from 1991, Martin said. A home equity loan that was paid in full, but was never recorded. We have the receipt. The receptionist's smile faltered. She looked at them, at their worn clothes and tired faces, at the plastic bag Martin was carrying with their belongings. One moment, please. She picked up the phone and spoke quietly. Martin couldn't hear what she said, but he saw her eyes flick to them, and he knew she was describing them, judging them, deciding if they were worth her boss's time. She'll see you, the receptionist said, and she pointed to a door at the end of the hall. Eleanor Vance was 73 years old, with white hair and gold-rimmed glasses and the kind of face that had seen everything twice. She sat behind a desk that was clean and organized, with a single photograph of a man and 2 children. She looked at Martin, and something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Mr. Webb, you remember me. I remember every customer who paid off a loan. She smiled. It doesn't happen as often as you'd think. Martin pulled out the receipt and placed it on her desk. She picked it up, her hands steady, and she looked at it for a long time. This is my signature, she said. Yes. And the bank stamp. Yes. She set the receipt down and looked at Martin. The bank's records show this loan was never satisfied. Our computer system has no record of this payment. Your computer system is wrong. Eleanor was quiet. She picked up the phone and dialed a number. John, I need you to pull the physical records for loan number 447892 from 1991. Yes. Bring them to my office. She hung up and looked at Martin again. If this receipt is genuine, then there was a clerical error 19 years ago. A mistake that should have been caught. It cost us our house. I understand. No, Martin said. You don't understand. We lost everything. Our home, our car, our cat. We've been sleeping in a shelter. My wife is 72 years old, and she's sleeping on a cot in a room full of strangers because your bank made a mistake. Eleanor's face was pale. She removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. I'll do everything I can to fix this, Mr. Webb. I promise you. Promises don't mean anything anymore. The physical records took 3 days to find. They were stored in a warehouse outside the city, in a box with 100 other boxes, filed under a number that had been entered incorrectly into the system. But they were there. The original loan documents. The payment records. And folded into the file, a carbon copy of the receipt Martin had carried in his coat pocket for 19 years. Eleanor called Martin on the 3rd day. The records confirm what you said, she told him. The loan was paid in full on December 1991. A cashier's check in the amount of $43,700. The payment was received and processed, but it was never applied to the principal due to a data entry error. So the house is ours. It should be. But the title has already been transferred to your children, and they've listed the property for sale. Martin felt the floor drop out from under him. They're selling it. The listing went live yesterday. Asking price $420,000. My daughter is selling my house. Mr. Webb, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to take time. The bank will need to acknowledge the error, which means a legal process. Your children will need to be notified. The sale will need to be stopped. How much time? Months. Maybe longer. Where am I supposed to live for months? Eleanor was quiet. Then she said, I have a spare room. It's not much, but it's warm and it has a bed. Martin and Vivian moved into Eleanor's spare room on a Thursday afternoon in November. The room was small, with a twin bed and a dresser and a window that looked out onto the alley. It was clean and quiet, and Vivian cried when she saw it, because it was the first private space they had had in weeks. You don't have to do this, Martin said to Eleanor. Yes, I do. I helped put you on the street. The least I can do is help get you off it. They settled into a routine. Martin woke early and made coffee. Vivian read the newspaper, which Eleanor brought home from the office. They ate dinner together at a small table in the kitchen, the three of them, and they talked about nothing important, because the important things were too painful to say. George filed the legal challenge. The sale of the house was halted pending investigation. Margaret called Martin and screamed at him for 15 minutes, calling him a liar and a cheat and a selfish old man who didn't care about his family. "You took everything from us," she said. "And now you're taking the house." "I'm not taking anything," Martin said. "I'm keeping what's mine." The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, Martin went back to the house on Cherry Street 3 times. The first time he stood across the street and watched the wind blow leaves across the porch. The second time he walked up to the door and tried the handle, but it was locked. The third time he found the cat. Pudge was sitting on the back porch, thin and dirty, his gray fur matted with mud. He looked up when Martin approached and he meowed a small, desperate sound. "Hey, buddy," Martin said, and he picked up the cat, who weighed almost nothing, and he carried him back to Eleanor's house. Vivian cried when she saw Pudge. She held him in her arms and whispered his name, and the cat purred so loudly that Martin could hear it from the kitchen. The legal decision came on a Tuesday in January. The judge ruled in Martin's favor. The loan had been paid. The lien was invalid. The property belonged to Martin and Vivian Webb, free and clear. Margaret did not attend the hearing. She sent a lawyer who argued that the statute of limitations had expired, that Martin had waited too long to contest the debt. But the judge pointed to the receipt, the bank records, the testimony of Eleanor Vance, and said that the law was clear. The bank made an error, the judge said. The plaintiffs, Martin and Vivian Webb, have proven that the debt was satisfied. The house is theirs. Martin sat in the courtroom and listened to the words, and he felt nothing. No relief, no joy, no anger. Just a strange emptiness, like a room that had been stripped of all its furniture. Vivian was crying beside him. George was smiling. Eleanor was sitting in the back row, her hands folded in her lap. "Congratulations," she said afterward. "You got your house back." "Thank you," Martin said, "for everything." "Don't thank me. I was just doing my job." They moved back into the house on Cherry Street on a Saturday morning in February. The house was empty. Margaret had sold the furniture. The dishes were gone. The books were gone. The photographs were gone. The walls were bare, the floors were dusty, and the kitchen smelled like someone else's cooking. But the cactus was still on the windowsill, and the clay handprint was still on the counter, where Vivian had left it, where it had always been. She picked it up and held it, and she stared at the small brown print of a child's hand, the ridges and valleys of a 5-year-old's palm, preserved in clay for 40 years. "Jamie," she said. "I wonder where Jamie is now." "I don't know," Martin said. "But I know where you are." He put his arm around her, and they stood in the empty kitchen, in the house that was theirs again, and they listened to the silence. That night, Martin went out to the garage. His tools were gone, the brass pipe wrench, the adjustable pliers, the soldering torch, all of it sold or thrown away by his children. The workbench was empty. The pegboard was bare, but the top drawer of the toolbox was still there. He opened it. The roll of thread sealing tape was inside, wrapped in the same rag he had used 53 years. The plastic was cracked. The spool was nearly empty, but it was there. He picked it up and held it in his hands. It weighed almost nothing. It was worth 79 cents. It was the first thing he had ever bought with his own money, and it had survived everything. He put it in his pocket, next to the receipt, and he went back inside. Vivian was sitting at the kitchen table, holding the clay handprint, looking at it in the dim light. The cactus sat on the windowsill, unwatered, unloved, alive. "We have nothing," Vivian said. "We have each other. That's not enough. It's always been enough." She looked at him and her eyes were wet, and she smiled, a small broken smile that made Martin's chest ache. "I want to go to bed," she said. "Okay. I want to sleep in my own bed." "Okay." They walked up the stairs, past the empty rooms, past the bare walls, past the ghosts of the life they had built and lost and built again. The bedroom was empty, the mattress gone, the curtains gone, the photographs gone, but the bed frame was still there. Martin took his coat and folded into a pillow. Vivian took her sweater and did the same. They lay down on the bare springs, holding each other, and they slept. The receipt sat on the kitchen counter the next morning, next to the coffee maker that wasn't there anymore. Martin looked at it while Vivian made coffee in a pot she had borrowed from Eleanor. The yellowed paper, the faded ink, the signature that had saved them. He picked it up and read it again. December 3, 1991, payment in full. Signed, Eleanor Vance. He folded it and put it in his pocket, next to the thread sealing tape, next to the only things he had left in the world. The coffee was ready. Vivian poured 2 cups, and they sat at the empty table in the empty kitchen, and they drank. "We should buy a table," Vivian said, "tomorrow, and chairs, tomorrow, and a bed, tomorrow." She smiled. She was 72 years old, and she had nothing, and she was smiling. "I love you, Martin. I love you too." They sat in the silence, the house creaking around them, the wind blowing outside, the sun rising over the street where they had lived for 40 years, and the receipt sat in Martin's pocket close to his heart where it would stay. 3 days later, Martin walked past the county courthouse and saw the Taurus in the impound lot, still waiting for auction. He stopped and looked at it through the fence. The white paint was dull, the tires were flat, the windows were still fogged. He thought about the coat in the back seat, the one he had already retrieved. He thought about all the things he had lost, all the things he would never get back, and he walked away. The phone rang on a Thursday night. Martin was in the kitchen, fixing the faucet with his old tools, the ones he had slowly replaced with trips to the hardware store. Vivian was in the living room, reading by the light of a lamp they had bought at a garage sale. The phone rang and Martin answered it. "Dad?" It was Margaret. Martin didn't speak. He held the phone and he listened to his daughter breathe. "I'm sorry," she said. He said nothing. "I'm sorry for what we did. I'm sorry for taking the house. I'm sorry for everything. Why are you calling?" "Because I want to fix this. I want to make it right." "You can't make it right." "I know." Her voice cracked. "But I can try." Martin closed his eyes. He thought about the house on Cherry Street. He thought about the cat on the windowsill. He thought about the clay handprint and the roll of thread sealing tape and the receipt that had saved them. "Come over tomorrow," he said. "We'll talk." He hung up the phone. Vivian looked up from her book. "Who was that?" "Margaret." "What did she want?" "She wants to make things right." "Can she?" "I don't know." Martin walked to the window and looked out at the street. The moon was rising pale and thin, and the stars were scattered across the sky like small, cold fires. He put his hand in his pocket and felt the receipt, still there, still folded, still real, and he waited for morning. The doorbell rang at 9 the next morning. Martin had been awake since 5, sitting at the table they had bought from a widow 3 blocks over, drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's okayest, Dad," a joke he had never found funny until now. He opened the door. Margaret stood on the porch with a man Martin didn't recognize. She looked thinner than she had at the courthouse. Her eyes were red, and she held a manila envelope in both hands like an offering. "Dad, this is Arthur. He's my lawyer." Martin looked at the man, young, early 40s, with a face that hadn't yet learned how to lie well. "Come in." They sat at the table. Vivian joined them, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug, her eyes watchful and still. Margaret put the envelope on the table. She didn't open it. "We sold the house," she said. Martin felt something shift in his chest, a stone turning over. "To who?" "A developer. He's going to tear it down and build townhouses. We got 2.3 million. 2.3 million. She nodded. "It was all we could get. The market's not what it was." She paused. "I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because we lost it all, Dad. We put the money into a partnership, a commercial real estate thing. The partner took everything and ran. Last I heard, he was in Dubai." Martin said nothing. "Andrew left me. He said I ruined his life. The kids are with me, but I can barely afford the apartment. I'm working at a pharmacy." "A pharmacy, Dad." She laughed, and it was ugly, and it was true. "I thought I was smart. I thought I was better than everyone. I thought I deserved everything." She slid the envelope across the table. "There's $200,000 in there. It's everything I have left. I want you to have it." Martin didn't touch it. "Why?" "Because it's yours. Because I took everything from you. Because I have to live with what I did, and I don't know how." Vivian reached across the table and put her hand on Margaret's. It was the first time she had touched her daughter in 4 years. "We don't want your money," Vivian said. "We want you." Margaret broke. She put her head on the table and sobbed, her shoulders shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Vivian held her, and Martin watched, and the stone in his chest turned over again. Arthur cleared his throat. "Mr. Vance, there's something else." Martin looked at him. "I've been looking into the legal details of the eviction. The documentation your daughter signed, it was prepared by a law firm called Morrison & Cross. I know the name. Are you familiar with a man named Thomas Cross? The lawyer who handled the sale, the one who came to the house." Arthur nodded. "He's been disbarred 3 weeks ago. Fraud, forgery, misrepresentation. He had a pattern: elderly clients, vulnerable situations. He helped your daughter with the paperwork, but he also helped himself. He took a finder's fee from the buyer that was never disclosed. He forged several signatures on the closing documents, including yours." Martin felt the air leave the room. "What does that mean?" "It means the sale was never legal. The house was transferred without proper title clearance." Without your signature, without proper notification, without a valid power of attorney. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sheaf of papers. I filed a motion to set aside the sale. The developer is contesting it, but if I can prove fraud, and I can, the property reverts to the estate. I don't have an estate. I don't have anything. You have a right of redemption. The house is worth more now than when it was sold. The developer paid 2.3. It's worth 3.8 now, maybe more. If the sale is voided, you get it back. You can sell it, keep it, whatever you want. Martin stared at the papers, but the developer already tore it down. The lot is still there. The value is in the land. And there's something else. Arthur pulled out another document. The developer's insurance policy. They had a rider for historical preservation. The house was on the city's historical registry. Did you know that? No. The developer knew. They didn't disclose it when they bought the property. That's another violation. Another way to void the sale. Martin looked at Vivian. She was still holding Margaret's hand, but her eyes were on him, and they were wet. Martin, she said. I don't want it, he said. Dad, I don't want the house. I don't want the money. I don't want any of it. He pushed the envelope back toward Margaret. You keep that. You need it more than I do. Margaret shook her head. I can't. You can. You can. You have kids. You have a life. You made a mistake. We all make mistakes. The house is gone. The past is gone. I don't want to spend the rest of my life fighting for something I can't have back. Arthur looked at him, then at Vivian, then back at the papers. There's a settlement offer from the developer. They want to avoid court. They're offering $300,000 in compensation for the wrongful sale, plus legal fees. Martin thought about it. He thought about the house, the stairs, the cat, the garden. He thought about the clay handprint and the roll of thread sealing tape. He thought about the receipt in his pocket. Take the settlement, he said. Give the money to Margaret. She can pay back her mortgage, get her kids in a good school. Whatever's left, put in a trust for them. Dad, no. Margaret. His voice was quiet, but it cut. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for your mother. She wants you back. She wants her daughter back. If I have to give away everything to make that happen, then that's what I do. Margaret looked at Vivian, who was crying now, silent tears running down her face. Mom, Margaret whispered, come home. Vivian said, just come home. The settlement was finalized 6 weeks later. Martin signed the papers in Arthur's office, a small room with a window that looked out at the courthouse. He used his own pen, the one he had carried in his pocket for 40 years, the one with the chipped cap and the dried ink. He didn't read the settlement carefully. He didn't need to. He trusted Arthur not because he had earned it, but because Martin had decided that trust was a choice he was going to make. Vivian was waiting outside with Margaret. They had coffee together every Tuesday now at a diner 2 blocks from the pharmacy. It was small, it was ordinary, and it was everything. Arthur asked, I'm fine. You gave away a lot of money. It wasn't mine. It was just stuff. Things, you can't take it with you. Arthur smiled. That's what my grandmother used to say. She was right. They shook hands, and Martin walked out into the sun. The phone rang on a Friday evening, 3 months later. Martin was in the garden, a small patch of dirt behind the apartment they had rented, where he had planted tomatoes and basil and a single rose bush that refused to bloom. Vivian was inside, making dinner, humming a song he didn't recognize. He wiped his hands on his pants and answered, Mr. Vance? Yes. This is Detective Ramos from the County Fraud Unit. I'm calling to inform you that your case has been closed. My case? The Morrison and Cross investigation. Thomas Cross was convicted last week. He's facing 12 years. His partner, a woman named Susan Porter, was also indicted. She was the one who forged your signature. Martin sat down on the step. I didn't know there was an investigation. We didn't want to contact you until it was resolved. But we found something in Cross's records. A box of documents. He kept trophies, things he took from the people he defrauded. There's an item with your name on it. What kind of item? A small wooden box. The label says Vansteck, 1991. I'd like to return it to you. Martin felt his throat tighten. When can I come get it? I can bring it by tomorrow morning. Around 10? 10 is fine. He hung up and sat on the step, staring at the rose bush. The buds were small and tight, holding something inside that hadn't yet decided to emerge. Vivian came to the door. Who was that? A detective. They found something from the house. What is it? I don't know. The detective arrived at 10 precisely. She was a tall woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She carried a small wooden box no bigger than a shoebox, worn and stained with age. Mr. Vance, detective. She handed him the box. We found it in Cross's storage unit. There were dozens of items, jewelry, documents, photographs. He kept them as souvenirs. We've been returning them as we identify the owners. Martin held the box. It was lighter than he expected. Do you know what's inside? I didn't open it. It's sealed with tape and the label says your name. I thought you'd want to do it yourself. Thank you. She nodded and left. Martin carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen table. Vivian came and stood beside him. Are you going to open it? I don't know if I can. Then let's do it together. He took his pocket knife, the same one he had used to cut the thread sealing tape on the basement stairs, and slit the tape along the seam. The box opened with a small sigh, as if it had been holding its breath for 30 years. Inside, wrapped in yellowed newspaper, was a photograph. Martin lifted it out. It was the same photograph, the one from Eleanor's house, the one that had been on the mantel. The family in front of the house on Cherry Street, the woman in the flowered dress, the man with the mustache, the little girl holding a cat. But this one was different. On the back in pencil was a note, to Martin, for when you need to remember what home looks like. Eleanor underneath in a different hand there was another note, Martin, I'm sorry I never told you. The house was yours. I left it to you. I left everything to you, but they took it. They took it, and I couldn't stop them. I tried so hard. Dad, Martin read it 3 times. The handwriting was his father's. The same cramped letters, the same crooked lines, the same way of pressing too hard on the paper. He looked at the date on the newspaper wrapping, December 12, 1991, 9 days after the receipt, 9 days after his father had signed over the house. He had tried to fix it. He had tried to tell Martin the truth, but the letter had never arrived. It had been intercepted. Stolen. Vivian put her hand on his back. Martin. He tried to give it back. He tried. I know. He loved me. He loved me and I never knew. You know now. Martin sat down at the table, the photograph in his hands, the box in front of him. Inside the box, beneath the newspaper, was something else. A small clay handprint. His handprint. The one he had made in kindergarten. The one that had been on the mantel next to the photograph for as long as he could remember. He picked it up and held it in his palm. It fit perfectly, the way it always had, the way it always would. I want to go home, he said. This is home, Vivian said. No, I want to go to Cherry Street. I want to see it. One more time. The lot was empty. The house was gone. The stairs, the porch, the cat door, the garden, all of it gone. Just dirt and gravel and a single foundation stone, cracked and worn. Martin stood at the edge of the property and looked at the space where his life had been. He didn't feel angry. He didn't feel sad. He felt something else, something quiet and still, like the moment after a long rain. Vivian stood beside him, her arm through his. It's just a place, she said. It was never just a place. I know. He walked forward onto the lot, his shoes crunching on the gravel. He stopped where the front door used to be and knelt down. He took the clay handprint from his pocket and set it on the foundation stone. Someone will find it, Vivian said. I hope so. He stood up and looked at the sky. The clouds were thin and white, drifting slowly, going nowhere in particular. I'm ready to go home, he said. Me too. They walked back to the car, an old sedan they had bought with the money from the settlement, not much, but enough. Martin drove and Vivian sat beside him and they didn't talk. They didn't need to. Margaret came for dinner every Sunday now. She brought the kids, 2 boys ages 8 and 10, who called Martin Grandpa and asked about the cat. The first time, Martin had shown them a photograph of the orange tabby, and they had asked if they could get a cat of their own. Margaret had said no, and Martin had said yes, and Vivian had laughed, and Margaret had laughed too. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to perfect. Margaret still had nightmares about the trial, about the house, about the things she had done. She still went to therapy twice a week. She still called Martin sometimes just to hear his voice, to make sure he was still there. But she was trying, and that was enough. The text came on a Tuesday afternoon. Martin was in the garden, picking tomatoes. His phone buzzed and he wiped his hands on his shirt and looked at the screen. Unknown number. I know I don't have the right to say this, but I'm sorry. For everything. For the house. For the money. For the lies. I hope you find peace. Andrew Martin stared at the message for a long time. His son-in-law, the one who had left Margaret, the one who had stood in the kitchen and watched them lose everything. He typed a reply, I already have. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to the tomatoes. That night, Vivian found him in the living room sitting in the dark. What are you doing? Thinking. About what? About the house. About my father. About all the things I should have said. She sat down beside him. You said what mattered. Did I? You loved him. He knew. That's all that matters. Martin looked at his hands. They were older now, spotted and thin, the same hands that had held the receipt, the same hands that had carried the clay handprint, the same hands that held Vivian in the empty house on the night they had nothing left. I still have the receipt, he said. I know. I don't know why I keep it. Yes, you do. He reached into his pocket and pulled it out, the yellowed paper, the faded ink, the signature that had saved them. He unfolded it and read it again, the way he had 1,000 times before. December 3, 1991. Payment in full. Signed, Eleanor Vance. There's a story here, he said. A story I'll never know. Maybe that's the point, maybe. He folded the receipt and put it back in his pocket. Then he reached for Vivian's hand, and they sat together in the dark, listening to the wind, listening to the silence, listening to the small, quiet sound of two people who had lost everything and found each other. The next morning, Martin woke early. He made coffee, he watered the garden, he checked on the rose bush which had finally bloomed, a single red flower, small and perfect, holding the morning light like a secret. He went inside and found Vivian still asleep, her hair spread across the pillow, her face relaxed and young in the soft light of dawn. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched her breathe. She opened her eyes. "What are you looking at?" "You. Find anything interesting?" "I found everything." She smiled and reached for him, and he lay down beside her, and they stayed there, in the small apartment, in the small bed, in the small life they had built from the ashes of everything they had lost. The receipt was in his pocket, on the nightstand where he had left it. The clay handprint was on the foundation stone, on Cherry Street, waiting for someone to find it. The photograph was on the mantel, a new mantel in a new house with a new family. And somewhere, in a drawer in a box, in a place Martin would never see, there was a letter from his father, written in cramped handwriting, dated December 12, 1991. A letter that said, "I'm sorry. I tried. I love you." A letter that had never been delivered. A letter that Martin would never read. But he didn't need to. He already knew. The cat appeared 3 weeks later, a stray, orange and thin, with a scar on its ear and a look in its eyes that said it had seen things. It showed up on the porch one morning, sat down, and refused to leave. Martin looked at it. The cat looked at Martin. "You want to come in?" The cat blinked. Martin opened the door. The cat walked inside, found the spot of sun on the living room floor, and lay down. Vivian came out of the kitchen. "Who's this?" "Our new roommate." "We already have a cat." "We don't have a cat." "We do now." Martin smiled. "I guess we do." He sat down on the floor next to the cat, and the cat let him. He put his hand on its back, feeling the warmth of the sun, the rhythm of its breathing, the small, steady pulse of a life that had found its way home. The receipt was in his pocket. The clay handprint was on Cherry Street. The photograph was on the mantel, and the cat was purring. That night, Martin sat on the porch and watched the stars. The sky was clear, and the stars were bright, and the wind was warm and smelled like summer. He thought about the house. He thought about the cat. He thought about his father and Eleanor and the receipt and the box and the letter he would never read. He thought about Margaret and her boys and the garden and the rose bush and the way Vivian laughed when she was happy. He thought about the thread sealing tape, still in his pocket, still there, still real. He pulled it out and looked at it, a roll of thread sealing tape. Nothing special, nothing important, except that it was. He put it back in his pocket, next to the receipt, next to the photograph, next to everything he had left. The cat came out and sat on his lap. He put his hand on its back. The stars kept shining, the wind kept blowing. And Martin Vance, 72 years old, with nothing and everything, sat on the porch of the small apartment he had learned to call home, and he waited. For what, he didn't know, but he was patient. He had learned to be. The boy came the next morning. He was maybe 12, with red hair and freckles, and a bike that was too small for him. He stopped in front of the apartment and looked at the cat. "That your cat?" "I guess so. He looks like the cat from my neighbor's house." "The one that ran away." "Maybe he did." The boy looked at Martin. "You Mr. Vance?" "I am. My mom told me about you. She said you knew my grandma." "Who's your grandma?" "Eleanor Vance. She died before I was born." "But my mom says you lived in her house." Martin felt the air shift, the way it does when the past reaches out and touches the present. "I did live in her house, a long time ago. My mom says you were like a son to her." Martin didn't know what to say to that. He didn't have words. He had a receipt in his pocket and a photograph on his mantel on a clay handprint on a foundation stone, but he didn't have words. "I have something for you," the boy said. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small envelope, worn and yellowed, the same color as the receipt. "She wrote it a long time ago. She told my mom to give it to you if she ever found you. But my mom didn't know where you went. She just found the letter in a box with your name on it." The boy held out the envelope. Martin took it. His name was on the front in handwriting he recognized. Martin, he opened it with hands that were old and steady and true. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once. He unfolded it. Dear Martin, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've come home. I always knew you would. I left you the house. I left you everything. I know your father tried to give it back to you, but they took it from him. They took it from both of us. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth, but I want you to know that you were never alone. You were never forgotten. You were always loved. The house is yours. The memories are yours. The life you build from here is yours. I hope you find peace, Martin. I hope you find joy. I hope you find everything you were looking for. With all my love, Eleanor. Read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket, next to the receipt, next to the sealing tape, next to everything he had ever needed. Thank you, he said to the boy. My mom said you'd say that. Your mom sounds smart. She's a teacher. That makes sense. The boy got on his bike. I gotta go. My mom's making breakfast. Tell her I said thank you. I will. The boy pedaled away, his red hair catching the sun, his bike rattling down the street, smaller and smaller until he disappeared around the corner. Martin sat on the porch. The cat sat on his lap. And in his pot, next to his heart, the receipts and the letters and the photographs and the tape all lay together, a small collection of ordinary things that held everything he had ever lost and everything he had ever found. He looked at the sky. It was blue. It was ordinary. It was an